So, hi everybody, welcome back to Minka Guides. This month we'll be looking at self-love and specifically around queer self-love. And I have Amanda Kibler here today as my guest. How are you doing today, Amanda?
I'm doing great. So excited to be here.
Wonderful. So Amanda Kibler is a 30-year-old queer, non-binary, polyamorous person who lives in New York, and they work as a self-love and aligned habits coach with Queer Compassionate Alliance. Alignment, yeah. And they also recently launched a podcast called Queer Rising. So it sounds like you've been very busy, Amanda.
I'm trying to be busy.
But I'm so glad we're having this conversation because self-love is something that suddenly just kind of come right up on my radar in a really big way in the last couple of months, in a sense that I'd never really expected it before. So I'm just so excited to be having this conversation with you. So I thought probably best to start with looking at what the idea of self-love is, because I think for people who are my age or older, so 40 plus, the idea of self-love has always been seen as like this negative thing. Oh, they're so in love with themselves. Someone who's like really confident, or like an external thing, and a judgment on that. Whereas actually self-love and a self-love practice is clearly very different to that. So what does that mean for you?
For sure. I mean, I definitely grew up with a lot of that same messaging around like confidence being like this negative thing. But I think as I got older, that's when I started realizing I'd internalized that so much that like it was zapped, right? Like,
yeah.
I think the ultimate difference though between what we see and what we tend to vilify on some level and like what real self-love is where is it coming from and what is our goal, right? So we often try to project confidence into the world, but the ultimate goal for that is often like it's our relationship with the world. It's what are we getting back? We're trying to get people to think we're amazing, to think we're capable, to look up to us, to admire us. But if it's not also internal, it's not really self-love. We're just kind of starved for attention. Mm-hmm. And in fact, like if you're lacking the self-love piece, which I definitely was for a really long time, it can still really appear like you're super confident. And yet on the inside, when you're all by yourself, things are not going great. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So how did you start on your self-love journey?
Honestly, it was a giant culmination of a lot of things in my life, but like I think that's how things work, right? All the messaging eventually converges and you're like, "Ooh, I'm not in a good place," right? So it was a lot of the like being an AFAB human, like diet culture messaging, right? I was on this like search for wellness, which ultimately I came to realize was a search for a thin body that I was never going to have. And that got me to a place where I like hated myself and my body so much. It was getting a better relationship with my queerness and like realizing that even though I had gone through my at least initial, not my non-binary piece of the journey, but my initial like initiation into the queer community and figuring out my sexuality, like I'd done that on what you would assume to be a quote unquote regular timeline, like when I was young, like in college at least. And then it still, like when I went back out into the world, even though I thought I was out, like really truly I found that I kind of unintentionally became recloseted again.
How interesting.
Because I went into teaching and like teaching isn't unfortunately teaching, there's still a stigma, right, of like queer folks and children. So like it didn't feel like I was allowed to be open about it. And my school itself, like just on its own, was not a super accepting community. And then like coupled on my relationship at the time was very straight passing. So there was a lot of like, I'm not technically in the closet, but sort of I am. And like, I felt very unseen and like that in itself was a lot of misalignment, a lot of am I queer enough, and a lot of like, am I allowed to be queer? Like,
Yep.
strange questions, like all these questions that like seemingly don't go together, but absolutely do for all of us.
Yeah.
And then like the last piece was just like my relationships themselves. And as I started like dipping my toe into the idea of like, I happened upon polyamory on social media.
Yep.
And even without exploring it, like once you start into that world, just watching it, you start hearing a lot of the messaging. And I'm like, my relationships are very unhealthy. I am literally like begging these people for attention. And like, that doesn't necessarily mean that our relationships were bad or like those were bad people or bad relationships 100%. But a lot of that did have to do with my self-love. Like, it wasn't coming from inside of me. All these different pieces culminated and none of it was coming from inside of me. I was just like performing in my relationships, in my like just going out into the world in a way that I would hope would please people. So I, like we said before, like I appeared relatively confident. I don't think anyone understood that I was like deep in it on the inside, because outwardly I appeared like this happy, bubbly human, but I was constantly looking for that validation from other people. And like, that's the difference. Yes, and one day absolutely. I was like, this is not going to work. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And it's so interesting because to link that back into polyamory, because that has been a big part of the reason why I've ended up kind of going on this self-love journey as well. And that's because I practice solo polyamory, where I focus a lot on myself as my own partner. And to begin with, I was like, yeah, that's fine. Like I can make space for myself, you know, blah, 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 blah. And then it's only been the last couple of months I've been like, have I actually been treating myself like I would like a loving partner, or do I just like take myself for granted all the time and like push myself all the time? And I'm not, if I am my own partner, I'm being a terrible partner to myself. And so this is really interesting that this has kind of come up through there in a similar way for you as well.
So much, 100%, that whole thing. I didn't have time for myself, and I hated being alone, right? Like, we think that's normal, but oh my God, you should not feel this dreading sense of loneliness every time you're alone. And I'd say should not as like a how dare you if you do, but like, we got to do some healing journey because it's not fun. That's not right. I should like being alone with myself.
Exactly. And also linking back to what you were saying about actually feeling so insecure with partners as well. I think that's one of the things that I used to think that I'm fine when I'm on my own. Like when I'm not in a relationship, I'm all good. I'm like, you know, totally confident. I'm fine. I'm dealing with the world okay. But as soon as I get in a relationship, I just start projecting all of this stuff onto the other person. And it's all the insecurity that's actually there all the time. But because I wasn't engaging anything emotionally intense, I didn't have to address that. And so I was like really struggling with that as well. So yeah, I completely understand how like, you know, all of these kind of streams of like queerness and gender and then like polyamory all kind of weave into getting us to where we are. So a lot of the time when people talk about self-love, they talk about it as a practice, something that you do. So what does a self-love practice look like, or specifically for you, or just generally for most people?
Yeah. So the way that I define a self-love practice is really hitting in on 3 separate areas. One, working on knowing yourself. So having some kind of practice in place for intentional self-exploration, be that intentional researching or regular journal practice or some kind of like basic mindfulness or meditation. And none of these things have to be like super formal, but like giving yourself permission to explore. Because, oh my God, there's so many levels of my identity that, like, I didn't even know could be on the radar before. And then when I've given myself permission to explore the just little things that come up, like whatever tweaks my interest, I'm like, whoa, I'm turning into a whole new person. So, like, that's the one. The second one for me is rebuilding that sense of self-trust. So lack of self-love, like, comes from all these messages, but it also comes from the way that we internalize the messages, and if we can even trust ourselves to show up for ourselves, right? If we're leaning on all these other people to show up for us, but often we're not actually doing it for ourselves, we don't even trust ourselves to do it, right? How many times do we set plans to be able to do something, some kind of self-care, whatever, reading a book, even like taking a nice bath, whatever, and then somebody needs something and that time that was for me goes out the window, right? Like, oh, well, that was just free time. So yeah, of course I'm available. Or just simply like not checking in with our emotions, or shoving our emotions down, down, down into the pit of everything.
That is
So,
something
like,
I've massively struggled with.
My God, so much. So like rebuilding that sense of self-trust, which for me just means actively taking time to show up for yourself, to check in with yourself, like having a self-check-in practice of just like going in and being like, how am I feeling right now, physically, emotionally? What do I need? Is there anything I can do to make myself 10% more comfortable? And also like making space for just you and having that be non-negotiable. Like my very first, like, I'm going to make a habit out of this was so broad as I need to do one thing for me every single day. And it could be big or small. It could be taking a walk. It could be closing the computer and stopping work and watching a movie. It could just be like having a nice snack that I enjoy. Like, but I was like, I just have to do one thing for me every day, because if we don't trust ourselves to at least show up in that smallest way of one tiny thing for me every day, like,
yeah,
of course we're relying on other people, right? We have to get in
Exactly.
the habit of showing up for us. And the third piece is just like that dialogue, that like the way we talk to ourselves, and like we do it out loud, we do it inside our heads, and oftentimes it is not nice.
Yeah.
So that was for me, like, we got to start shifting that. Like, I started realizing, especially like mirrors, I think are huge for a lot of us. They were definitely big for me. I felt like every time I look in the mirror, I would be picking myself apart, right?
Yeah.
Whether it was like my physical body, which many times it was, or it was like the things I had done that day and like feeling I wasn't good enough. Like, I would say them out loud, I would say them in my head. Like, I was not talking to myself nice. So that for me was also where I made the shift for the self-talk, because that can become an intentional practice, right? I said, every time I look in the mirror, I have to say something nice to myself. And like, again, that could be out loud or it can be in your head, like whatever works for you. It makes you feel comfortable. But like, if you're intentionally stopping to say something nice, it means that you're drowning out the opportunity to say something mean.
Yeah, exactly.
At this point, like, I look in the mirror and I'm like, you look so good. You're so cute. And I'm like having such a fun time. And now it's like automatic. Like, I'm impressed with myself.
Good.
And the moment that you realize you're doing that automatically, like, I remember like the first time I was like, whoa, you're a boss. You're so cute. And then I was like, when did I become the person that does that?
That's so huge as well. But I'm also really struck by how much so much of this is such a conscious thing to do. So like what you're just, someone could be listening to this and being like, I take myself for a walk every day. I make myself a nice snack. Like, how is this different to like how I'm living my everyday life? But I think it's the really conscious kind of caring, self-care element in there of just being like, I am doing
100%.
this for me. And being so aware that you're doing this all the time to give to yourself.
Yes. There is a huge difference between what we do intentionally and mindfully and what we do on autopilot because it feels like it's just part of our day or we just have to. If
Exactly.
like when I was even like I listed, for example, like closing the computer and watching a movie, right?
Yeah.
If I'm mindlessly laying in bed and watching Netflix all day, like, but like it's not about taking care of me. It's just like, I don't want to do anything, like, or I'm just exhausted and I need to recharge and it's not intentional. I'm probably not going to get the jolt of like, I'm doing something so nice for me. But if I'm intentionally like, okay, it is 6 p.m. or whatever, and I need to stop, I can have some time to like watch a movie tonight. Let me make my like coffee or tea or whatever and like just sit and relax. Like that feeling is very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, by the way, that's exactly what I did at lunchtime today. I was like, I am still recovering from the festival I was at on the weekend, and I'm just gonna at lunchtime just like let myself lie down and watch something, just so that like I knew that I was still like kind of taking care of myself, even though I was like, I still have to be working. You know, that's what I have to do today. I knew that that was something I was going to have to do, but like this, I can have some like soft, comfortable, nourishing time to just like let myself rest a little, which is, I think that's a really big thing for me, is like letting myself rest is a big like self-love thing that I'm having to learn. Why do you think it is something that we struggle sometimes to maintain like all the time? You know, why is it a practice that sometimes we stumble with and, you know, are good at sometimes and not so good at other times?
I think there's multiple reasons. And I think one is just the world and the messaging, right? Like we are told, as we've already said, that like this idea of confidence and self-love is bad. And sometimes that's in like that overconfidence piece, but also it's just in the taking time for ourselves. People are like, yeah, but how can you not be available? I feel like you're not doing anything, right? It's expected that if other people want you around, and if I've texted you or sent you a message or an email, like you're going to respond immediately.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So like one, being able to set aside that kind of messaging and being like, no, that's not normal for me to be available for everyone else 24/7. And so just like giving myself permission. But then like there's also the in itself habit pieces, right? There's 3 basic components to building a habit: having a cue, getting the routine set in place, and then having some kind of like making it feel rewarding afterwards. So like if our cue's not in place, then we're literally just forgetting to do it, right? We don't have anything to be like, now is the time that I'm supposed to do the habit, then I literally just forget it.
Yep.
So there's that, like out of sight, out of mind, especially in the hustle bustle world we live in.
Yep.
If there's a problem going on in the routine piece, it could be that we've literally made our habit way too big, right? If I want to start some kind of mindfulness practice, right? And I set my habit to, I'm going to sit in stillness and silence and for like 30 minutes every day. Like, no, that's not going to end up happening from 0 to like 30 minutes daily. Like, one, I don't always have the time. 2, I'm probably not used to sitting that long and being in silence. Like, it's just no good. So, like, starting too big doesn't work. Sorry, go ahead.
You probably would. You'd start to do it for, like, you do the first day 30 minutes, and then, like, the next day probably, and then by the third day, you'd be like, oh, I don't have time for that today. Instead of, like, starting small and building, like, a 5-10 minute practice, you know, and just kind of getting that in there. Yeah. And I know that this is where your 2 streams of coaching come together, which is the self-love and the habit. So how do you, it's clear that those kind of things do really fit really well together. How did you get into do habit coaching?
So this is like literally my, like all my stuff coming together, because I came into this from that wellness place, right? I came into that from like, I want to build up wellness and wellness habits. And then somewhere along the lines, that's when I realized that self-love piece was like super missing, you know, like, so I realized that I don't want to focus just on this, like, my brain just stopped working. Just on like the nutrition and exercise.
Okay. Yeah. That's what, so you originally trained as a holistic
nutritionist,
nutritionist, yes, exactly.
Yeah. But then like once I got through all of that, I realized like that on its own can't be what I do. I can help people with that as part of their goals, but like that on its own got me into a terrible place. So I'm not going to be that person for anyone.
Yeah.
And that's when I started like looking more broadly at the concept of habit building. And I first applied it to wellness, right? And like trying to get movement and nutrition habits to stick. And then I realized like without those other pieces in there of like a truly more holistic alignment of like mental health level good stuff,
Yeah.
it's not enough. And
Yeah.
that's when I started applying it to everything, which is like, that's what started my first baby self-love practices, right? Because I was like, okay, mental health is where I need to start. I'm not in a good place right now. And the more I work on nutrition or movement, and like, it's all coming from a terrible place of trying to fix myself. That's not where I want it to come from. It's doing damage. We need to fix that. We need to shift it. So I changed my direction and I applied my habit straight into like my mental health stuff, and holy, like huge difference. Night and day. Yeah, it was like click. That's the piece that's been missing for years.
Finally, it all makes sense.
Exactly.
And one of the nicest things about having this conversation today is that we're in Pride Month. So happy Pride Month. Happy Pride. And one of the reasons why, so it's really interesting because how I discovered you was I was like, cool. So I'm really starting to get into this kind of stuff about self-love. Right. So I'm just going to go on Instagram. I'm going to type in hashtag self-love and have a look what's there. And I was just like bombarded with people's pictures, selfies of them just being like, yeah, self-love, kind of thing. And I was like, oh, this is not what I'm looking for at all. And so then I was like, wait a minute, I'm approaching this the wrong way. And I typed in queer self-love and then up you popped. And I was just like, look at all these resources, look at all this information. I'm loving it so much. So I think it's really important to talk about why self-love is so important to the queer community, to the trans plus community. Like, why is it such an essential tool for us in navigating everyday life?
Honestly, I think it's because we have to acknowledge the fact that we are at this like interesting intersection, right? Of like quote unquote regular like cishet society messaging that gives you all these reasons not to like yourself via diet culture, hustle culture, patriarchal gender norms, all of that, right? Yep. And then our own special brand of messaging they love to give us, right? About we're not good enough in some way, that we are not supposed to exist, that we're something to be fixed, that it's sinful, or that we're just supposed to shove our most authentic selves down so that we can conform. And when you get all of that, plus obviously for like so many members of our community, their own special brands of messaging, and like people of color and neurodiversity and disabilities and all of that, like all that intersectionality, that's like a lot of terrible, harmful messaging, and it really impacts our self-love. So like we have a lot to combat. So,
absolutely.
Yeah. I don't know. So that's where it comes from. But then like
and it's that not normative, that all of that, like, no, you're fine. All of that non-normative messaging. Do you know what I mean? Like saying that because of this factor in your life and because of this factor in your life and maybe this one and this one as well, you are not the norm. You don't fit into the norm. And therefore, you should expect like not to have like loving relationships. You should expect to have the career opportunities. You should expect to live in fear all the time, and all of these things that are like input onto us. And yeah, it's so intense that to actually unpack that messaging and to be able to have a good relationship with yourself takes so much extra work.
Extra work for sure. Yeah. But it also means, and like this is the part I always love to come back to, is like, yes, it's all this extra to unpack and like against us. But also, it means that when we even start coming into ourselves on any level, be that from gender, from sexuality, from relationship identities, from romantic identities, whatever, oh my goodness, it's like it cracks. You're like, well, society doesn't make sense. And it suddenly is like, well, if I'm gonna be different, I might as well get to explore anything about me that's different in any way I want. And I love it. It's like a superpower for self-love.
It really is. And I think it's just the amazing that kind of that moment or that time period when everything starts to kind of really click across in your life and you're suddenly like, oh, hi everyone. Like I saw this meme the other day that was just like, once you've ruined your reputation, you can live pretty freely. And I was like, oh, that fits into everything in my life. I was just like, yeah, so I have gone and just kind of blown everything up in my life and ruined my reputation. And hey, I'm way happier now and I'm way more comfortable and I have much more deeper connections with the people I love and a much more deeper connection with myself. And that's kind of amazing. And even though it's harder and it's a lot more extra work, it then starts feeling like a privilege. You're just like, oh God, I get to do this and I get to experience this and I get to understand the world through all of these different ways. And wow, that's incredible.
100%. That's why I'm always like, no, but queerness is like a freaking superpower. It's amazing. It's magic. Like, it's scary at the beginning of the journey when we're like trying to get through it all because it's a lot of layers. But once you actually like start and once you like get through it on one level, like I might as well question everything now and I love it.
Exactly. It's just like, okay, throw out the game plan that we've been told, explicitly and implicitly since birth, what we're supposed to be doing. And let's actually look at what it is that I genuinely want. And one of the lovely things was that when I started going through this self-love journey very consciously recently, was a lot of my like queer and non-binary friends who were started to be like, oh yeah, so like you should try this or you should do that. And even like shout out to Leo if you're watching. Leo posted all the way to Spain so that I could have it here with me while I was going through this. I've got it over there. That's why I'm looking over there. A tarot deck that's all about self-love. And so they sent me this gift. And I was like, wow, what other tools are out there that like that you would recommend for somehow like everyday kind of reminding yourself that this is something we are consciously doing as a practice for ourselves?
For sure. Now my initial brain says to go books, but then I have to say the more I thought about this, I was like, I've read a lot of books on self-love. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of them fell short. One, because they're like many of them are not going to be queer centered. And I feel like our queerness is very like we need that factor in there. Otherwise, it's just compounding it that much more. But like also there tends to be this strange like vibe in many of the books of like just love yourself. And I'm like, that's not how that works. I don't just like flick a switch. Like when we're deep in it, we're like, what do you mean just love yourself? Like I can't. If I could, I'd already be doing it.
Exactly. So what's that step? It's just like, that's what I've come here for.
Right.
To me, that step,
it's like, supposed to be the bridge. Where's the bridge? So there's that. But I love that your friend has this tarot deck. I love that. I actually do
such a good tool.
It's so good. I actually do affirmation cards to like free affirmation cards every month to my newsletter because like I have found affirmations to be so freaking essential.
Yes.
But I also like so much in my journey and what I recommend people is like it's very personal. So like start by literally surround yourself with the messages. Surround yourself with people that look like you, that feel like you, that share your experiences. So for me, that was things like finding body positivity stuff on social media, right? Finding queer media and social media, like social media, TikTok, Instagram, but like also books and movies with queer characters. I almost like am disappointed when I come across non-queer media at this stage because I'm like, oh, I've done this for too many years.
Like, I've like, consumed all of that before, and I don't have a taste for it anymore, surprisingly.
Right. Interestingly, I don't see myself in it anymore. Surprising.
Exactly. But you're
But
right,
yeah,
surrounding
same
yourself
for
with that kind of content is a really good idea.
it's like huge though. Like I can't know myself if I don't know there are options, right?
Yes.
And I can't love myself if I don't see those examples.
Yes.
If I am going to continue to see myself as an other, as an outsider, and as a rarity, it's hard to be like, this is this amazing magic and I should be so like proud of myself. Yeah. But when you start seeing other people light up because of their queer identities and their sexuality and their gender exploration, it's like, oh my God, I'm normal.
Yes.
And it's awesome.
Exactly. It's like, oh, there is space for me. I am completely, me being myself is completely okay, and it fits in the world absolutely fine, as long as I'm, surrounding myself with the right people.
Yeah. And then other than that, like other than your identities and like I said mine, but like also I find myself often, I don't know how this happened. Maybe TikTok's trying to tell me something, but neurodivergent TikTok is like coming at me. Yeah. This may be a next self-discovery. I'm not sure.
You're like, are you trying to tell me something? What?
Just say. Yeah, literally anything that's your identity. And also just stuff. There is a whole branch of social media around the healing journey and the growth journeys that are very positive and rooted in self-compassion. Actively seek out those and make that your feed, and ditch all the things in your feed that are making you like not feel good about yourself, because
100%
self-compassion has to be like essential.
Yeah, absolutely. And so speaking about your newsletter, which I love, how do people find you and find out about your coaching service and find you on Instagram and all of that?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I am at Queer Compassionate Alignment. And then my website is queercompassionatealignment.com. And I just started a podcast that I'm so excited about, which is called Queer Rising. I'm like obsessed. This is my brand new venture, but I'm so excited about it.
I love it. And I love it. And what a perfect month to launch it. That's so amazing.
Right? We have to. I was like, we are pulling through. We are being the amazing phoenixes we are.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today. I really, really love and appreciate it. And everybody should go and check out Queer Compassionate Alignment. And if you're watching this on my blog or YouTube or stuff, you'll be able to find links to everything. And yeah, go and sign up to the newsletter. Go and like listen to the podcast. And yeah, try and create this self-love practice for yourself, particularly if you're queer. Right, everybody. Bye.
Bye.